My extra special guest today is Mr. Jim Sommerfield, who is a friend, client, and a truly seasoned compliance professional with over 25 years of industry experience. If you haven't met Jim, you're going to love this conversation because he has done it all in the compliance profession, including the development, implementation, and management of Wintrust's ongoing compliance programs, such as surveillance and the firm's sales practices. Let's get to know Jim a little bit. Jim, if someone were to look up your profile, look you up on LinkedIn and the World Wide Web, they'd see that you're a prolific leader in our industry, specifically on the security side. I always love to start here because we get a better understanding of your background and what interested you in our little niche of the market segment. So if we were to step back, what are the series of events that led to your interest in this particular topic in financial market regulations?
Sure. Much of my history goes back to my college days. Growing up, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I always had an interest in the financial markets. And I think a major part of that was my father. Now, my father actually worked in a totally different industry. He actually worked for United Airlines, but he always had an interest in financial markets. He always talked about stocks, in particular with my grandfather. And I sort of would pick up on that, and I would want to be able to contribute to those conversations. And it was really sort of, I think, my father, if you will, who planted the seed in me to have an interest in the financial markets. Of course, then I went off to college. My degree actually is in finance, and I just found that I really had an interest in the financial markets. I will say that I did try my hand as a financial advisor, and while I didn't have a strong sales acumen, I found that I did have an interest in the legal aspects of the financial markets in particular, and that's sort of what led me down the path to becoming a compliance officer in the compliance industry.
That's fascinating. The other day I was having a conversation with someone, Jim, and they said their interest in the financial markets or the securities industry started with the sense of curiosity of what all those tickers were in the newspapers that people used to read, and it wasn't that long ago, right? It's been only a little while, and everything's been digitized and on the smartphones and whatnot. And so, speaking of which, Jim, given your experience, given your leadership in our industry, if Mr. Sommerfield had a magic wand, right, what would you do? If we could start there, what would you do to sort of transform our industry for the better?
That's a great question. I think, my focus would be on making sure that there are clear expectations and really straightforward communication between probably the regulatory agencies and the various investment firms. Obviously, regulation has been changing dramatically, and I look back on my 20 plus years in the compliance field, and the changes that have been implemented over that time period have just been enormous. But what I've found, and where I think we are on the right path, at least for now, and I'd like to see this continue, is there's been a lot of emphasis by the regulators to have good dialogue with firms and with compliance staff. I think it can always be better. I think continuing to have a good dialogue between compliance officers, business leaders, and the regulators is critical for good regulation. I think that, there's always tends to be a knee-jerk reaction at times to make changes to the regulatory environment. And sometimes those changes lead to what I would call unintended consequences. So it's very important to make sure that there's a good line of communication between both the regulators and the business leaders, the compliance department staff. The other thing I would focus on is, as I said earlier, clear expectations, clear communication. One of the things that is probably the most frustrating thing from a compliance leader perspective is ambiguity in a regulation. Ambiguity creates many problems. And while I understand that there's not a one-size-fits-all regulation to deal with various issues in the industry, I think ultimately having that good line of communication, clear expectations, and maybe some additional clear guidance goes a long way to making our lives in the compliance side a lot easier.
You know what? I love that point, Jim, because it was only maybe 5-10 years ago where all the rules were very I'll call it rule specific, right? And there wasn't as much ambiguity. And now the industry is transformed to more of a principle based, hey, do better. But what does that do better mean, to your point, right?
Right.
How am I going to, and so I think from your perspective, I hear that very loudly. And as a vendor, as a technology provider in this particular industry, there needs to be that clarity. And I think that's a fantastic point. And so speaking of this onslaught of wave of new regulations within the wealth management profession, obviously those regulations are trying to do something to protect investors. And so what are your thoughts on how folks in the business and in compliance can embrace regulations such as regulation best interest, what the Department of Labor is trying to do on the prohibited transaction exemptions and whatnot?
Yeah, I think ultimately when you look at it from, just the business side of the business, business side of financial services, it's built on customer relationships. Customer relationships are, if you want to say, our bread and butter. I think many of these regulations that have been put in place are focused very much so on the client experience and ensuring, of course, that advice that's being given is best for the client, whether it's, looking at other alternatives. But in the end of the day, they're not mutually exclusive, right? The point here is that you have the regulations exist to improve the client experience. And so how do we make the most of it, right? And so one of the ways that we do that is through the use of technology. Specifically, I'll start off with talking about contact management systems. One of the things that we've leveraged tremendously here at Wintrust is that we're focused on making sure that we're doing a good job of documenting our engagements with our clients, specifically using the tools to document what's happened, what's going on with the client, has anything changed. So making sure we've got good touch points with the client. And then to the extent that we have relationships that require ongoing monitoring, that we're documenting annual reviews of those clients. Again, leveraging the contact management tools helps us to not only make sure that we've got good notes on the content of our communication with the client, but also meet that regulatory requirement that the SEC has said, which is if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So, it's really about enhancing the customer experience and using that regulation as a means to say, we can leverage these technology tools, improve our communication with our clients. One of the things I've always said is that a lack of communication is typically what you're going to find is the root of most customer complaints or concerns. And so having that good line of communication, having good documentation around those communications is critical. Now, getting a little bit into the weeds as we talk about Reg BI and the DOL PTE, specific to considering other alternative investments. We've been able to leverage the peer-compare tool through InvestorCOM, which has been a great asset for us. It's given us the ability to take a look at the various alternative funds, for example, so we can compare various aspects such as risk and cost, and really provide best-in-class product to our customers, and making sure we have the documentation to show that we've done that due diligence. And it's really been a great tool for us in helping us to, again, not only meet our BI obligations and our DOL obligations, but also improve the customer experience, because we're able to engage with the customer from a knowledge, greater knowledge on the product with regard to what we're recommending. So again, technology is critical. And as technology continues to evolve, finding new ways to leverage those technology tools, again, I go back to customer experience. We exist to serve our customer, right? That at the end of the day, we have to remember why are we here? What's our purpose? And it's to serve our customers. And so anything that we can do to improve our customers' experience, and obviously we know we still have to meet our regulatory obligations. So finding ways to merge those together as an opportunity that I think has worked well for us.
Fantastic, Jim. And I love the way you frame that question. It effectively triangulated to say, look, regulatory obligations and how the business functions fundamentally, it should be brought back to that investor experience. And if it moves the dial, whether it's leveraging technology or some policy, then hey, it's for the sake of improving the client's experience. Really, really well said and thoughtful. So let me ask you this. You're a seasoned guy. You have, I'm sure, a few more stories per se. As you contemplate this confluence of regulatory expectations, exams coming up, FINRA saying we're expecting to 1,000 Reg BI exams this year alone, what's keeping Jim Sommerfield awake at night?
I think ultimately it's the fear that you're missing something. That's kind of always, I think, as any compliance leader would say, you are always worried about what you don't know. And, I think we've got a great governance structure here at my firm. We have colleagues who work with us on our risk side, our internal audit side. We're constantly keeping abreast of new changes in rules and regulations. But at the end of the day, what keeps me up at night is the fact that I might be missing something. We've got a very highly trained staff who are able to help us to identify, risks and concerns. But that's the concern, is that, am I missing something? Am I overlooking something? And certainly, that's, why I think a good culture of compliance really, in the end of the day, is going to help. I don't want to say cover that, because you're always going to have that concern, but it helps me to sleep better at night knowing that we have a great culture of compliance here at Wintrust. The fact that, again, as I mentioned earlier, we have stakeholders with our risk group, our internal audit group, as well as we have the resources and support of management. And that, to me, is critical, because I can honestly tell you that as a seasoned compliance professional, if I didn't feel I had the support of management, I don't think that this would be a place I'd want to be. I am grateful for the fact that management is a partner, that they view compliance as a partner, and that we have a seat at the table with them. And they're very considerate of our concerns, and of course, looking to us for guidance to make sure that we're meeting those regulatory obligations and fulfilling our, best interest obligations for our customers.
Phenomenal. Love it, Jim. And I totally agree. Good compliance is good business, and the tone from the top totally matters all the time. Mr. Sommerfield, thank you very much for taking time to be part of this conversation, and we hope to have you back on our show.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Really hope you enjoyed today's session. Please like this video and subscribe to InvestorCOM's YouTube channel for much more on this episode and much more.